All right, sweet. So we are going to go over, how to export the data. So obviously we have motion or motive from OptiTrack. So if we look at, here's a scene that we shot. So we go to edit. We're in edit mode, so we can play that back. Right. So here's the scene we did last week. Performance. Great. You gotta remind me exactly what we did.
You select the take
Right.
in the list. You gotta change your layout to at the top layout. And then go to edit. And then
Great.
now you find your take and then right click it.
Cool. So here's where you see our take. So we did layout, just to review, edit. So now right click, export tracking data. So the file, you have to make sure that it's in this because there's a bunch of other different formats. So we were trying with the FBX ASCII file, but it just gives us like the markers. You don't actually see the joints. So we had to switch it to, this is essentially what it was before. So it gives us different settings down here. So if we switch it to binary, just want to make sure the scale's good. We don't really need, depends on time code here. We're not shooting time code or anything, but traditionally everything would be on time code. So our cameras, our audio, our Mocap system, everything should be on time code. So you would include that, but for the sake of this, because we're just taking the data and we're going to play with it and mess around, that's fine. I want to make sure the skeletons are on. Marker nulls. So the nulls are like, again, it's just like the markers, so like the dots. So it'll export its own asset that just shows where the marker is, but we don't really need that. Rigid body, this tends to be for like our props. So if we had like the sword or the broom, right? So if we wanted to include that, if there's nothing, then it shouldn't show any data, but so it doesn't hurt to just keep it on. Cool. Unlabeled markers you don't need, especially if we're not tracking that stuff, right? So if we had markers on the floor or floating around, or if like say we had a prop just off to the side, we don't want that, just so we don't confuse the data or think we need it. So more or less you can keep the settings the same. Cool. So we export it. Let's call this, you can always change the name or keep it the same. That's fine for now.
Choose your save location. Put in a folder that you know.
Right. Yeah, so just make sure that you know where you're saving it. So for now, we'll do desktop, create a new folder. I'm just gonna call this, what was it? I'll just call it test. So in this test folder, export. Cool, so let that think. Then we wait some more. Tis like 70 to 80% of a text live for like an animated live. Cool. All right, so go here, should have a test folder. Great. So now we've opened Motion Builder. So Motion Builder, basically this is where we're going to take our data and retarget that to a model. Do you have a 3D model somewhere?
I can get one. I have the.
Is Unreal on here?
Should be. I have models. You probably have models on Unreal.
Okay, so we'll look for a model. So first thing, I'm just going to drag in the data. So if do FBX merge all takes, that means take all the animation, all the data that's in there. So just let that. Cool. So there it is. So we should see like the skeleton, basically. One thing, when you first start Motion Builder, you can switch your settings. So settings, interaction mode. So there's different, whatever you're used to, Motion Builder, 3ds. I like Maya just because it's similar to Blender or all these other things. Plus, I think you guys are learning Maya, right? So play with that. So that way, now we have our data in here. Right. So that's good. Pull the model, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Great. So the first thing, essentially, we need to characterize. So characterize is saying we're just basically labeling the two, like the data. We're just saying like this data belongs to Tim or this data belongs to Andrea and stuff, right? So this is where the T-pose comes in handy, because when we characterize, we want to have it in a T-pose or a neutral stance. If we don't have that, there's other ways to like manually snap the joints and everything to a T-pose. But because we have a T-pose, for this example, I'll show us like, cool, we're good, say we're happy with that. We do want to, if I press Control F, that does like different viewpoints, or so there's like side, Control Q does another, that's like the regular perspective mode. Control T, that's from the top. I'm trying to remember what is the other one. It's T, F, Q. But basically, when you bring in your model and your data, you want them to face the same direction. If you don't, it'll look weird. And so I'll show you once we get a model in. So let's characterize. We'll characterize first. So if I go to Asset Browser and Character, so Asset Browser, Characters, I'm going to take this character, I'm going to zoom into the hip, I'm going to glide that over until it turns green, and on this bottom right, you'll see it pop up. You should say hips, so characterize biped, because we're bipeds, and then over here in the characters, it'll create a new character. So you want to make sure that you differentiate what they are, so I'm going to rename that. I'm just going to Andrea data, cool, and then I'm going to do the same thing here. Character, should see Tim's hips, characterize biped, new character. Right click, rename, Tim data. Cool, everyone following so far? Sweet. So now, where's our data?
For previous demo. Just drag that to the desktop.
So for our test, previous demo, so we're getting our model. Oh, wait.
Just say check the drive.
Yeah. Just gonna be checked. I think we're good. Yeah. Cool. So now, what do we got?
So there's the bandit is a complete one.
This one.
And Alfred.
These have bones?
Yeah, they should have a rig.
Okay. So we're getting our model here, so basic bandits, so these should be rigged. So FBX merge, but because there's no animation, or this is just our model, right? So we want to put our animation on this clean rigged model. So no animation's fine. Not supported, psych. Let's try another one. Alfred? Is that FBX?
It's a blunder, I don't think that's gonna work. Go back. Man, it should work.
What are these? Are these in?
Yeah, I mean, you can try that.
Okay. Merge, no animation. Oh, yay. Who's this? Cool, so we have our model. If on the bottom left you click the scene, these are all, everything that we're dropping in, it's just saying, this is the scene, here's everything inside our scene, right? So this is our data. If I right click, select branches, it actually highlights everything, right? So that's highlighting Tim, right click, select branches, Andrea there, this root. So the root if I press Control A, you can like cycle through this mode here. So I like staying in X-ray so that way I can see the model with the bones, right? So this is the geos, like the geos part of that. You can see it's part of the root, so the geos attached to it. It's literally just like the mesh. So I will usually select the model's roots, right click, select branches. You can do this one or two ways. I'm gonna rotate the model to face the same direction as the data. It may or may not work. So if that doesn't work, then you traditionally, I think most of the time, will rotate the data, but I'm gonna try it just because I feel risky today. Let's see, so select branches, properties. So if I rotate this, you can see on the bottom right here, like the values are changing. So I can, if I want to be precise, I can just type that in, double click, -90. Oh no, that went wrong. Yep, nope, we're not doing that. Okay, don't like that. So I'm gonna start fresh because that's what happens. And usually I like to start fresh just to wipe it clean, as opposed to trying to fix something that's not. So let's do it again. So we'll go to test. We will start with our character, our model. Oh, no. New. What was it? This guy? Eric, great. Where's our model? Cool, so we have our model. He's in an A pose. So because we have the T pose, right? We have our data doing the T pose. We want the model to also be in a T pose. So if we go zoom in, if I can zoom in.
I'll give us more models.
What was that?
I'll give more models.
Okay, cool. This video is going to be really weird for you guys to listen to. There's like so much background. It's okay. So just kind of straighten that out. And you don't have to be like super perfect, but like it's debatable. It really depends. Some say that if you do like a more natural T-pose on the model and you match the more natural T-pose of a person, the data like syncs up better. But at the same time, it's also all like math and algorithms that are beyond me, to be honest. So it's just a matter of your preference. I've done both, and as long as you get your result that you're happy with, I personally don't, I'm not attuned to one. Again, I try to be flexible to the pipeline and the studio. I just press Control T, so that way I'm kind of, if I left click and drag, you can select, you can rope select stuff, or you can just click. Right. That looks pretty good. Control F. Looks pretty good. Yep. Control Q. Cool. So that looks pretty good T-pose. So I'm going to do the characterizing. So again, we're going to characterize both our model and the data separately. So I should hover. It says pelvis, hips. Could not be completed. Great. So this happens when basically you have to do it manually. So when I did with the data, right? You know how I dropped it on the data and it just characterized it perfectly because it knew, basically it's naming conventions. So most of this process, it's picky about naming conventions. So if you have something called pelvis, another thing is called hips, it could or could not match up, right? If it's a hip bone, but it's called like 001, it won't know that's a hip bone. So you have to manually tell it, this is the hip bone, this is the arm, etc. So that's what's happening here. It didn't find this. So if I go to characters, it created one, but if I look here, it didn't find all the bones, right? So I'm gonna have to go in manually and do it. So hips, so I'll just select pelvis, then I'll right click, assign selected bone. So then I have to go and do this. So if I use the arrow keys, which I like, if your mouse is in this, it'll just cycle through a bunch of bones, right? If it's not, it won't do it. So this is my trick, my personal way of like characterizing quickly. So spine 1, this should be spine 1, it's not. Spine 3, it says assign it, yeah, that's cool. So that way now it's 1. If I click this, it'll show like more details. So if your rig has multiple bones and stuff. So now spine 2 should be there, spine 3 right above it. Now we're going to neck. So if I click here, it should be a neck, great. Go up there, head, cool. Now clavicle's here, right? So if you have this on, mirror matching, it does like, if you do one side, it'll do the other side. So it saves you a ton of time. So clavicle's good, upper arm, lower arm, hand, and then looks like there are fingers, so go thumb, so you can get in close. So I'm doing this pretty quick, but again, if you guys want me to slow down, we have this video. You can always watch it, pause where you need to, or ask me questions. So this is part of like the prepping process that we tend to do before. This at the thumb. Okay, index finger. So I tend to do this before anything. You can do this after if we shot the data and it's like, cool, now we're in the post-process production, it's cool. But if we're doing real time, like if you wanted to do the real-time baby and see all that, you would have to do this prior to your shoot. And the last thing you want is like everyone, you know, your whole crew and cast and everything just waiting around while you do this. So that I try to prep this like at least a week before, but sometimes I've gotten clients that'll come in and they're like, hey, we have a new model, can you get it up and going for real time? And like, oh sure, how much time have we got? Like 15 minutes, oh okay. So that'll happen. So just right clicking, cool, we have our hand, awesome. So this doesn't have to be perfectly green. It just tends to do that if it says like it's not perfectly parallel or like a perfect zero. But again, if you're doing a natural pose, it'll just naturally do that. When we characterize the data again, you'll see if we get perfect greens or not. Cool, so now we're moving to the leg. Sign there, down arrow again, and foot. Great, cool. So if I hover, it'll say it's not parallel with the x-axis, and yeah, it's fine, it's okay. So now we can characterize. So because we have to manually do this, instead of dropping this character in, I'm just going to click this lock button, and it's going to do the same thing, right? So lock that in, biped. So now we have a character. Our character should be that. So I'll rename that. Call this guy. So that's characterized. So now our model is characterized, and we can save this as a characterized model. So I usually put CHR just so I know that, cool, to characterize, I can use that. You can call this a seed. So if I cancel this, it's fine. File, save as, I'll call this like Eric seed. So seed is just like, this is the clean model that's characterized that we'll use all the time. So instead of having to do this over and over and over, this is our seed that we only need to do once. So seed character. Cool. We don't need this take. This take is just like empty data. It does that by default. But this would be an animation basically. But there is no animation, we don't need it. We can save that. Cool. So if I do file new and I bring in our seed, no animation, that should be there. We should have our guy character. Cool. Sweet. So let's do, so we'll keep that for now. So we'll keep we have our character there. Now let's bring in our data. So our data is, oh, did you give me another model?
Yeah, I have
that's
a few
fine.
models.
That's all good. So now we bring in our scene. Now we want all the takes because we want the animation. Here we are again. So now I'm gonna rotate our data. I'm just gonna do that just because we got errors. So if I right click, select branches, look at properties, rotate that. So again, I'm looking at the bottom right. So it looks like if I do 0 maybe. Cool. So that should be perfectly like facing the same direction, right? So now asset browser, character, drop that in, characterize, biped. So we should have a new character, and this was, who was this? Tim. I'm just going through it again. So going up to the scene, right click, select branches, rotate. Cool. Asset browser, character, drop that, characterize, biped. Cool, rename, and data. Cool. So now everything's characterized. Our two datas, our model. So now the fun part, if we click our model, we see that, so stance, we switch that to character, and we can choose who to slap this model to. We hit active. If I cycle Control A, and then now we play. There's TM. Now we can scrub. Right. So that clipping's probably from the clipping from. So this data is not cleaned whatsoever. So we just literally exported it as is. There was this whole entire process to cleaning the data in Motive, which we can tackle another day because I haven't done it. So, but again, like considering this, right? You can cut in, you can figure out angles, and that's what I tend to do. I try to think of from an editor or post mindset. So if I know his arms are clipping in certain parts, then I'll cut to like a close-up, right? And then when it's good, or like when the data's looking great, then I'll come back out to a wide, and then you can figure it out. And this is why, right, we don't have to think about camera angles while we're shooting, because now you can figure out camera angles here, right? So if I wanted, if we just pause this, Control A. So now, because we already have our seed file, right, because we made it earlier, I can bring in their seed again, merge, no animation. And so because it's already characterized, it'll create a second one. We call it guy 1. So as long as you know what that is, I'm just going to call it guy 2. Oh, this is bugging me. So guy 1, 2. So I select guy 2, stance, character, and then switch it to Andrea, active. Now we have our two old dudes talking to each other. Right? Cool. Oh, there's his arm. Yeah. Yeah, those are rotating. So we kept it in.
I don't know how I was able to do that.
You're so flexible. Contortionist.
So you would fix that arm in Motive, not Motion Builder?
So there are ways, yeah. So I would first look into Motive. So any system that you use that captures mocap data, I would do it. I'd look into, so if it's Vicon, look into like Shogun Post. If it's, Motive, use Motives, whatever their own proprietary, because it'll know how to handle its own data. So I would look into that process first. So look into the software, how to clean up the data in the software, get rid of all these like pops and all these weird contortionist stuff, and then bring it into Motion Builder. But you can, basically at this point, so from here, we have our data. So what we would do is, I would select the model and then plot the character. So we're going to bake the animation, right? So that way we don't have all this extra stuff. So skeleton, 30 FPS, 20, whatever you want to, I think we shot at 120, what do we?
I think so.
Yeah, so you want to try to keep your FPS consistent, at least, non-drop frames or drop frames. So if you're doing 120, don't do a 59.97 or a 24.97, like try to do it flat. That way there's a bit easier conversion rate. So you plot the character. So I'll plot it. So I did this for guy 1, which is on Tim's. So if I actually go to Tim and select, if I do Control A, so you see there's two sets of data, right? There's the data, and then there's the data retargeted to the model, but we don't need all that. So since I plotted it, if I do select branches and then right click, delete, let's see. Tim, got 1, active, Tim hips, select. Interesting, okay. Cool, so basically what I'm trying to do is, so I'm trying to bake the animation. we should be good there. And then if we remove, nope, doesn't like that.
Maybe guy one's the other character.
Nope, it's locking up something else. Trail data, guy 2, guy 1. Now I wonder, I might have to bake both. So I just baked guy 1, let's bake guy 2, let's see if this works. Oh, I don't like that. But the thought is, we bake the animation so that we can remove the old stuff. So that way we can just bring in the clean animation to Blender, Maya, whatever, and only have to deal with basically one set of skeletons. Like, figure out why it's doing this. Theoretically, you could export it just the way it is. So right now it's still in FBX, it's called seed, so we make sure to save that as, let's do, so this is our scene, fairly long name. I'm just gonna do hello scene take 3, and we can call this retargeted. So that means we retargeted the data, right? So save that. So again, we only need this actual animation, we don't need that. So save. Cool. I'm just gonna open that up. Again, just to make sure. I like to like always just start clean and then bring it in, just to make sure. Test, retargeted, merge, all takes. Cool, so we still have it, still there. Select branches, no, doesn't like it. I'm gonna troubleshoot this, figure out why it's not letting me delete it, but either way, you should at this point be able to use this data.